My name is Mabel Thornton, and I'm 82 years old. For the past 15 years, I've been living like a ghost in my own home, or rather what used to feel like my home. Let me tell you how it all started. Because, honey, this story needs telling. I built this house with my late husband Henry back in 1987, right here in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. We chose this spot, overlooking Grandfather Mountain, because Henry said I deserved a view that matched my spirit. That man always knew just what to say. The main house sits proud on 12 acres, with my little guest house tucked behind the old oak trees. That's where I live now. You see, when Henry passed 10 years ago, I thought it would be natural for my son Kenneth and his family to move into the big house. Kenneth was struggling with his contracting business, and my daughter-in-law Jill was always commenting about their cramped rental in Boone. Mum, Kenneth said. He still called me Mum then. We just need a year or two to get back on our feet. That was 2014. I moved into the guest house, thinking it was temporary. I kept telling myself they needed space to grieve too, to find their footing as a family. My grandchildren Cameron and Bree were just teenagers then, dealing with losing their grandfather. I wanted to give them room to heal. But here's what happened instead. I became invisible. At first there were family dinners every Sunday. Jill would call across the yard, "Mabel, supper's ready," and I'd walk over to my own dining room table, where I'd sit in what became known as Grandma's chair, the uncomfortable one nobody else wanted. Gradually, those dinners became every other week, then monthly, then only on holidays. Now, well, last Sunday I watched through my kitchen window as they grilled burgers on the back deck. 4 plates, 4 chairs. No fifth setting for the old lady who pays the property taxes. You want to know something that'll break your heart? I funded Kenneth's entire college education at Appalachian State, took out a second mortgage on this very property to pay for his business degree. When Cameron needed money for his truck, I wrote the check, $8,000. When Bree wanted to go on that spring break trip to Myrtle Beach, guess who made that possible? But somehow in their minds, I became just the old woman who used to be somebody important. Yesterday was my 82nd birthday. I woke up thinking maybe this year would be different. Maybe they'd remember. I made myself a nice breakfast. Blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup from Miller's Farm down in Banner Elk, and I waited. At 10 o'clock, I heard Jill's car start up. Then Kenneth's truck. By noon both kids had driven off too. The house sat empty all day, while I sat in my guest house, staring at a birthday cake I'd bought for myself at the Ingler's grocery store. That evening, around 8 o'clock, I decided to take a walk. Sometimes the mountain air helps when my chest feels too tight with sadness. As I rounded the corner by the workshop, I heard voices on the back porch. Did anyone remember it was Mum's birthday? That was Kenneth's voice. Oh shit, was that today? Cameron, my 22-year-old grandson with his fancy college vocabulary. Then Jill laughed, actually laughed, and said, well, it's not like she mentioned it, she probably forgot herself. But what came next, honey? That's what changed everything. Cameron's voice, clear as mountain spring water, carried right to where I stood frozen behind Henry's old workshop. Honestly, she's so out of it these days, she probably won't even know if we forget her funeral. The others laughed. My own family laughed. I stood there in the gathering dusk, listening to crickets start their evening song, and something inside me shifted. Not broke, shifted. Like a rusty lock finally deciding to turn. You see, what my family doesn't know, what they've never bothered to ask about, is that I never actually transferred the deed to this property. Kenneth's name isn't on any legal document. This house, these 12 acres, the mineral rights, the timber rights, even that fancy riding mower Kenneth loves so much, it's all still mine, has been all along. And here's something else they don't know. I wasn't just any English teacher. I co-founded Mountain Words Publishing back in the 80s. We specialized in Appalachian literature and regional histories. When we sold the company in 2005, my share was enough to make a comfortable woman very comfortable indeed. I've got assets they can't even imagine. I've got friends in places they've never considered. And I've got something else. I've got 82 years of experience dealing with people who underestimate the quiet woman in the corner. As I walked back to my little guest house that night, I made myself a promise. I've spent 15 years being grateful for scraps from my own table. I've spent a decade being treated like an inconvenience in my own home. I've watched my sacrifices be forgotten and my love be taken for granted. But that ends now, because what they don't realize is that being invisible has its advantages. You hear things, you see things, you learn exactly who people are when they think nobody's watching. And me? I've been watching for 15 years. 3 days after my forgotten birthday, something happened that I never could have imagined. Not in my worst nightmares about how cruel people can be. Jill knocked on my door Wednesday morning around 10 o'clock. She was wearing that forced smile she puts on when she wants something. The same one she used when she needed me to babysit for free every weekend, when the kids were little. "Mabel," she said, "we're thinking of driving up to Grandfather Mountain this afternoon. The fall colors are supposed to be spectacular this week. And we thought maybe you'd like to come along." I nearly dropped my coffee cup. In 3 years they hadn't invited me on so much as a trip to the grocery store, but there she stood, looking almost sincere, talking about family time and making memories. "That sounds lovely," I said, and I meant it. Maybe they did remember my birthday after all. Maybe this was their way of making it up to me. "Great, we'll pick you up around 2. Dress warm, you know how chilly it gets up there." I spent the rest of the morning getting ready like I was going to church on Easter Sunday. I pressed my best slacks, chose my favorite lavender cardigan, the one Henry always said brought out my eyes, and even put on a little lipstick. At my age, any family invitation feels like a gift. At exactly 2 o'clock, Kenneth pulled up in his big Silverado truck. The extended cab seats 4 people, and I figured I'd sit in the back with the grandkids. But when I walked over, Cameron and Bree were already claiming the back seats with their phones and earbuds. "Just hop in front, Mom," Kenneth said. "You'll get the best view from there anyway." So I climbed up into that passenger seat, not easy for an 82-year-old woman, let me tell you, and off we went down Old Highway 105 toward the mountain. For the first 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. Kenneth pointed out Mrs. Patterson's new fence, and Jill commented on how the sugar maples were turning. Cameron and Bree ignored all of us, lost in their devices. Just a regular family drive through the North Carolina mountains. But then the weather started changing. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, the kind that means serious business in these mountains. By the time we reached the winding road up toward Grandfather Mountain, rain was spattering the windshield. "Maybe we should turn back," I suggested, watching the sky grow darker. "Oh, we'll be fine," Kenneth said. "It's just a little mountain shower." But it wasn't just a little shower. By the time we were halfway up the mountain, rain was coming down in sheets. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up, and visibility was down to maybe 20 feet. That's when Kenneth pulled over. "Well, shoot," he said, though he used stronger language than that. "Engine's running rough, might be getting water in somewhere it shouldn't." He got out to check under the hood, and came back soaking wet and shaking his head. "This isn't good. We might be stuck here for a while." That's when Cameron spoke up from the back seat. "You know what? Bree and I could probably walk back down to that gas station we passed, the one near Fosk. It's only about 2 miles. In this rain," I said. "You kids will catch pneumonia." "We've got rain jackets," Bree said. "And we're young, we can handle it." Jill turned around in her seat. "That's actually not a bad idea. Kenneth, you could go with them, and I'll stay here with Mabel." But Kenneth shook his head. "I better go too, in case they need help getting someone up here with jumper cables or whatever. You know how these mountain mechanics can be." So there it was, decided. All 3 of them would walk to get help, and I'd stay with the truck. "Keep the engine running for heat, Mom," Kenneth said. "We'll be back in an hour, tops." I watched them disappear into the rain and mist, 3 figures in bright rain gear, getting smaller and smaller, until the mountain swallowed them whole. That's when the engine died. Just like that, no sputtering, no warning. 1 minute I had heat and radio. The next minute I was sitting in a dead truck on a deserted mountain road, with rain hammering the roof like bullets. I tried the key, nothing. Tried it again, still nothing. And that's when it hit me. The way they'd all looked at each other when Kenneth announced the engine trouble, the way Cameron had been so quick with the walking suggestion. the way none of them had seemed particularly worried about leaving an 82-year-old woman alone in a broken-down truck during a mountain thunderstorm. It wasn't engine trouble, this was a setup. I sat there for 4 hours. 4 hours in a truck that got colder by the minute, watching rain turn to sleet, and sleet back to rain. I used my emergency flashlight to read my watch, 3:15, 4:30, 5:45, 6:30. My arthritis started acting up something fierce, my chest felt tight from the cold. But what hurt worse than anything was the growing certainty that this was deliberate, they'd left me here on purpose. Around 6:45, headlights finally appeared through the gloom, but it wasn't Kenneth's truck, it was a county sheriff's SUV, with its blue lights flashing. A young woman in uniform got out and tapped on my window. When I rolled it down, she said, "Ma'am, are you Mrs. Thornton? I got a call from someone with an emergency alert device." That's when I remembered the medical alert necklace Kenneth had insisted I wear after Henry died. I'd pressed the button around 4 o'clock, when hypothermia started feeling like a real possibility. Yes, that's me. My family went to get help, but the deputy's name tag read, D. Bell. She had kind eyes and a familiar face. "Mrs. Thornton," she said gently. "I'm Dana Bell. You taught me freshman English at Watauga High in 2006. Do you remember?" I did remember. Dana Bell, shy girl in the third row, who wrote beautiful poetry about her grandmother. "Dana," I said, and started crying for the first time in hours. Not from relief, but from the horrible understanding that my own family had left me to die on this mountain road. "Let's get you somewhere warm," Dana said. "And then you're going to tell me exactly what happened here." But as she helped me into her patrol car, I heard her radio crackle. "Unit 23, we've got the rest of the family at Miller's Diner in Banner Elk. They say they've been there 2 hours waiting for a tow truck. 2 hours. At a diner, with heat and coffee and dry clothes." While I sat alone in the rain, wondering if I'd see morning. Dana Bell's house sits on a quiet street in Boone, the kind of neighborhood where teachers and sheriff's deputies can still afford to raise families. She insisted I stay the night, wouldn't hear of me going back to that guest house, not after what had happened. "Thornton," she said, as she wrapped me in a quilt her grandmother had made, "what those people did to you today wasn't an accident. You know that, don't you?" I was sitting in her kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate, finally warm for the first time in hours. But her words made me shiver anyway. "They're my family, Dana. That's exactly why it's so terrible." She pulled out her phone and showed me the photographs she'd taken at Miller's Diner. Kenneth, Jill, Cameron, and Bree, all of them dry as dust, sitting around a table covered with empty plates and coffee cups. The timestamp showed they'd been there since 4:30, while I was still sitting in that dead truck, praying someone would find me before dark. The diner waitress said they seemed pretty relaxed for people whose elderly mother was stranded in a storm. Dana continued. "Jill even asked for extra whipped cream on her pie. That detail hit me like a slap. Extra whipped cream while I was rationing my emergency water and wondering if I'd see another sunrise. I keep thinking there must be some explanation," I said. Dana sat down across from me, and I saw that same serious expression she used to get when she was working through a difficult poem in my class. "Mrs. Thornton, in my line of work, I see a lot of elder abuse. Financial, emotional, physical. What happened today checks every box for endangerment. They deliberately put you in a dangerous situation and abandoned you. But why? What could they possibly gain from?" And then it hit me. The conversation I'd overheard about my funeral, the way they'd been treating me like I was already gone, maybe to them, I was supposed to be. "Dana, honey, I need to tell you something, about my family, about how they've been treating me." So I did. I told her everything. 15 years of being pushed to the margins of my own life. The forgotten birthdays, the excluded dinners, the casual cruelty, how I'd funded their educations and their dreams and their emergencies, only to be treated like a burden they couldn't wait to shed. Dana listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small leather notebook. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "How long has this been going on?" "It started gradually after Henry died, but it's gotten much worse in the past few years, especially since Kenneth's business started struggling again." "What kind of business?" "Construction. He does mostly residential work, some light commercial, but he's been having cash flow problems. I heard him on the phone last month talking to someone about collateral for a loan. Dana's pen stopped moving. Collateral. That's when something clicked in my brain, something I'd been trying not to think about for months. Dana, I need to go home. There's something I need to check. She drove me back to the house around 10 o'clock. The main house was dark, but I could see light in Cameron's room. They were all back, safe and warm, and probably wondering when the crazy old lady would turn up. I didn't go to the main house. Instead, I led Dana to the guest house, to my bedroom closet, where I keep Henry's old file cabinet. In the bottom drawer, behind tax returns from 1995, I found what I was looking for, a manila folder labeled Plan B, should they ever push too far. Dana raised an eyebrow. You have a Plan B folder. Henry always said hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. He made me promise to keep certain documents where I could find them quickly, if I ever needed to. Inside the folder were photocopies of the original property deeds, Henry's will, my own will, insurance policies and bank statements. But most importantly, there was a business card paper-clipped to a handwritten note in Henry's careful script. The card read, Eliza Wren, attorney at law, estate planning and elder rights, Asheville, North Carolina. Henry's note said, Mabel, if you're reading this, it means someone is trying to take advantage of your kind heart. Call Eliza, she'll know what to do. She's been expecting your call for 20 years. Maya Dana read over my shoulder, 20 years. Henry set this up in 2004, right after Kenneth's first business failed, and we had to bail him out. Henry was worried that Kenneth might develop a sense of entitlement about our money. He wanted to make sure I had protection if I ever needed it. I looked at the documents spread across my little kitchen table, original property deeds with my name only, Henry's will, which left everything to me with full discretionary power over any future transfers. My own will, which currently left everything to Kenneth, but included a clause allowing me to make changes at any time for any reason. They don't know about any of this, I realized. Kenneth thinks because he lives in the big house, because he handles the lawn care and the utilities, because I let him make decisions about repairs, he thinks that means he owns it. Does he have any legal claim? None whatsoever. I never transferred anything. Never gave him power of attorney, never even put him on the bank accounts. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. I was saving that as a surprise for his 50th birthday. I was going to deed him half the property as a gift. What changed your mind? I thought about tonight, about sitting in that cold truck, abandoned by my own blood, while they ate pie and laughed at Miller's diner. They did. Dana helped me put the documents back in order. As she prepared to leave, she turned back to me. Mrs. Thornton, I want you to think carefully about what you want to do next. These documents give you a lot of power, but once you start using that power, there's no going back to the way things were. I walked her to the door, and watched her taillights disappear down the mountain road. Then I looked across the yard at the main house, where my family was sleeping peacefully in beds, bought with my money, under a roof that was still legally mine. Tomorrow, I decided, I was going to call Eliza Wren, because after tonight, there was already no going back to the way things were. Eliza Wren's office sits in a renovated Victorian house in downtown Asheville, the kind of place that whispers old money and serious legal business. I'd driven down Thursday morning, my hands shaking on the steering wheel of my little Honda Civic, but my mind clearer than it had been in years. The receptionist, a woman about my age with kind eyes, looked up when I walked in. You must be Mrs. Thornton. Miss Wren has been expecting you for a very long time. That gave me pause. She has? Oh yes, your husband set up what we call a contingency consultations in 2004. He prepaid for 5 hours of legal services, renewable annually, in case you ever needed to reassess your family situation. Henry, even 10 years after his death, that man was still taking care of me. Eliza Wren was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with silver-streaked hair, and the kind of firm handshake that tells you she's used to fighting battles and winning them. Mrs. Thornton, she said, as we settled into leather chairs in her office, your husband was a very wise man. He came to me with concerns about your son's sense of entitlement and what he called a tendency to treat your generosity as his inheritance. She opened a thick file folder. Apparently Henry had been more worried than I'd realized. He had me draw up several contingency documents, updated legal instruments that could be implemented if you ever felt your current family arrangements weren't serving your best interests. I told her everything, the forgotten birthdays, the gradual exclusion, and finally, the incident on Grandfather Mountain. Eliza listened with the focused attention of someone who'd heard similar stories too many times. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Thornton, I need to ask you some direct questions. Has Kenneth ever claimed ownership of your property in any official capacity?" "Not that I know of." "Why?" She pulled out a document from another file. "Because according to county records, your son filed a homestead exemption claim on your property last year. He also listed the house as collateral for a business loan from First National Bank of Boone." The room seemed to tilt around me. He did what? He filed papers claiming primary residence and financial responsibility for the property. It's not a legal ownership transfer, but it could complicate things if you decide to make changes. I stared at the paperwork. Kenneth's signature, bold as brass, on documents claiming rights to property that wasn't his. "Is that legal?" "It's fraud," Eliza said flatly. "Filing false homestead claims is a felony in North Carolina. Using property you don't own as loan collateral is bank fraud. Your son could face serious criminal charges." My mind raced back to conversations I'd overheard, but not fully understood. Kenneth on the phone talking about the property, as if it belonged to him. Jill mentioning when we inherit, as if my death was just a matter of scheduling. What are my options? Eliza smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Oh, Mrs. Thornton, you have many options. Your husband made sure of that." She spread documents across her desk like a hand of cards. New will forms, property transfer reversals, power of attorney revocations. I didn't even know I'd need. "The first thing we do is clean house, legally speaking. We file corrections on all the false documents your son submitted. We notify the bank that the collateral for his loan was fraudulently claimed. We make sure every legal record reflects the truth. You are the sole owner of that property, and all assets. And then we decide what kind of relationship you want with your family going forward, because Mrs. Thornton, once we start this process, they're going to know exactly where they stand." I thought about Tuesday night, sitting alone in my guest house, while they laughed about forgetting my funeral. I thought about yesterday, abandoned in a broken-down truck while they ate pie and planned their next move. I want them to understand that kindness and weakness are not the same thing. Eliza nodded approvingly. "Now you're talking like Henry's wife." We spent the next 3 hours going through paperwork. Eliza explained each document, each legal maneuver, each consequence. By the time we finished, I had a stack of papers that would reshape my family's entire world. "The revocation of Kenneth's power of attorney takes effect immediately," she explained. "He'll no longer be able to make any decisions regarding your finances or property. The corrected homestead filing goes to the county tomorrow, and the bank gets notified Monday morning that their collateral claim is fraudulent." "How long before Kenneth realizes what's happening?" "Well," Eliza said with that same dangerous smile, "that depends on how quickly the bank calls him about his loan." I drove home Thursday afternoon, with a briefcase full of legal documents, and something I hadn't felt in 15 years. Power. Real, tangible, legally backed power. When I pulled into my driveway, Kenneth was working on his truck in the main house garage. He waved at me like nothing had happened, like he hadn't left me to die on a mountain road less than 24 hours ago. "Hey Mom, how was your trip to town?" I waved back and smiled. "Oh, just taking care of some old business, honey." If only he knew. That evening, as I sat in my guest house kitchen reviewing the documents Eliza had prepared, I heard Kenneth's phone ring across the yard. Then I heard raised voices. Then I heard him say, "What do you mean fraudulent collateral claim?" I smiled and made myself a cup of tea, Earl Grey, with honey from the beehives. Henry and I had tended together 30 years ago. Tomorrow, Kenneth was going to learn that his mother wasn't the helpless old woman he thought she was. Tomorrow, my real life was going to begin. Friday morning arrived with the kind of autumn clarity that makes the Blue Ridge Mountains look like God's own painting. I woke up early, made myself a proper breakfast, and put on my best navy dress, the one I used to wear for parent-teacher conferences when I needed to command respect. Today I was going to reclaim my house. At exactly 9 o'clock, Sheriff Dana Bell's patrol car pulled into my driveway, followed by Eliza Wren's silver BMW. We'd planned this carefully. Legal documents served properly, with law enforcement present, no room for arguments or intimidation tactics. Kenneth came out of the main house when he saw the cars, still in his bathrobe, coffee mug in hand. The look on his face when he saw me walking toward him, flanked by a lawyer and a sheriff's deputy, was something I'll treasure forever. "Mom? What's going on?" Eliza stepped forward, all business in her charcoal suit and briefcase. "Mr. Thornton, I'm attorney Eliza Wren, representing your mother. I have several documents to serve you this morning." She handed him a thick manila envelope. Notice of property ownership clarification, revocation of previously assumed powers, and formal eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Kenneth's coffee mug slipped from his fingers and shattered on the brick walkway. Eviction notice? "Mum, this is crazy. You can't evict us from our own home." "It's not your home, Kenneth." My voice was steady, calm. "It never was your home. The property deed has my name on it. Only my name, it always has." Jill appeared at the front door in her robe, took one look at the scene, and came running across the yard. "What the hell is going on here?" Dana Bell stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to keep your voice down and let the attorneys handle this." But Jill was past rational thought. "Mabel, you can't be serious. We've lived here for 10 years. We've put money into this place. We've maintained it, improved it. With my permission, I said, as my tenants. Tenants who stopped paying rent, stopped showing respect, and started filing false legal documents claiming ownership of property that belongs to me." Kenneth's face went white. "How did you—" "Mum, I can explain about the homestead filing." "No need," Eliza interrupted. "Bank fraud and filing false property claims are felony offenses in North Carolina. The district attorney's office will be handling that explanation." That's when Cameron and Bree came stumbling out of the house, probably wondering why everyone was yelling at 9 in the morning. Cameron took one look at the sheriff's car and said, "Oh shit, what did Dad do now?" "Language, Cameron," I said automatically. "Some habits die hard." Bree, my 19-year-old granddaughter, who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories, looked at me with pure venom. "Grandma, what are you doing? You can't just kick us out." "We're family, family," I repeated. "Tell me, Bree, when's the last time you had a conversation with me? When's the last time you asked how I was feeling, or if I needed anything, or even acknowledged I exist?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. "When's the last time any of you treated me like family, instead of like an inconvenient piece of furniture you have to work around?" Jill tried a different approach. "Mabel, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We love you. We've always taken care of you." "Taken care of me," I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Jill, darling, let me ask you something. Who pays the property taxes on this house?" She looked confused. "Well, Kenneth handles all that. Kenneth handles submitting the paperwork. I write the checks for. Who pays the insurance premiums? Who pays for the roof repairs, the HVAC maintenance, the well pump that went out last spring?" Silence. "I do. I pay for everything. I've been paying for everything for 10 years. You've been living in my house, eating food bought with my money, driving vehicles I helped purchase, all while treating me like a burden you can't wait to be rid of." Kenneth tried one more time. "Mum, please, let's go inside and talk about this rationally. We're past talking, son." I turned to Dana. "Deputy Bell, would you please escort my family off the property so I can change the locks?" "Now hold on." Kenneth's voice rose. "You can't just throw us out on the street. We have rights. We have nowhere to go." Eliza consulted her clipboard. "Actually, according to your credit report, you have a rental property in Boone that's been sitting empty for 6 months because you couldn't find tenants willing to pay your asking price. Perhaps you should consider more reasonable rent expectations." I watched Kenneth's face cycle through confusion, anger, and finally, desperate calculation. "Mum, let's make a deal. We'll start paying rent. We'll include you in family activities. We'll, Kenneth. My voice cut through his babbling like a blade. Wednesday evening, you left me alone in a broken-down truck during a thunderstorm, while you sat in a warm diner, eating pie. You abandoned your 82-year-old mother on a mountain road and didn't come back for me. That was an accident. The engine really did, Dana. I looked at the deputy. Show him the photographs. Dana pulled out her phone and showed Kenneth the pictures from Miller's diner, the timestamp, the relaxed poses, the empty plates. You left me to die, I said simply, and now you want to negotiate. Bree started crying, not the pretty tears of a girl who knows she's cute, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone who suddenly realizes consequences are real. Grandma, please. I'm sorry. We're all sorry. I looked at my granddaughter, really looked at her for the first time in months. When had she become a stranger? When had her eyes become calculating instead of loving? Bree, honey, I'm sorry too. I'm sorry I let this go on so long. I'm sorry I enabled behavior that turned you into people I don't recognize. I turned to address all of them. You have 30 days. Use them wisely. As Dana and Eliza prepared to leave, Kenneth made one last desperate play. This isn't over, Mum. I'll fight this. I'll contest everything. Eliza smiled that dangerous smile of hers. Mr. Thornton, I'd strongly advise against that. Your mother has been very generous so far. But if you force this into litigation, we'll be filing criminal charges for the bank fraud. And trust me, orange jumpsuits are not flattering at your age. I watched my family walk back into my house, for the last time as residents. In 30 days, it would truly be my home again. But first I had phone calls to make, starting with a locksmith. Word travels fast in small mountain towns, and by Monday morning it seemed like half of Boone knew that Mabel Thornton had finally stood up to her family. What I didn't expect was how people would react. I was at Miller's Hardware picking up new locks for my house when Betty Miller, whose family has run that store since 1962, came out from behind the counter to give me a hug. "Mabel Thornton, you brave woman," she said, loud enough for everyone in the store to hear. "It's about time someone put that boy of yours in his place." I was surprised. "Betty, I didn't know you knew about." "Honey, everyone knows. Kenneth's been bragging around town for years about how he handles your affairs, how he's basically running your property. Always struck me as odd, considering you're sharper than most people half your age." An older man near the paint counter turned around. "You're Mrs. Thornton. You taught my daughter Sarah at Watergate High in '98. She still talks about your Shakespeare unit, says it changed her life." By the time I left Miller's, I'd been approached by 6 people with similar stories. Former students, parents of former students, people whose lives I'd touched during my 30-year teaching career. All of them supportive, all of them ready to help however they could. At the grocery store, it was the same thing. Martha Webb from the flower shop stopped me in the produce section. "Mrs. Thornton, I want you to know that if you need any character witnesses for anything legal, I'm here. I remember when my Tommy was failing algebra, and you spent your lunch hours tutoring him for free. For 2 months, he's an engineer now, works for the State Highway Department." I was starting to realize something I'd forgotten during my 15 years of family invisibility. I'd made a difference in this community. I'd mattered to people. I still mattered. Tuesday afternoon, Dana Bell called me with news that made my heart swell. "Mrs. Thornton, you need to see this. Can you meet me at the library?" The Boone Public Library had always been one of my favorite places, and librarian Susan Crawford greeted me like a long-lost friend. "Mabel, Dana told me what you're going through. Come see what we've been working on." She led me to a conference room where Dana was sitting with a pile of notebooks, letters, and what looked like newspaper clippings. "After word got around about your situation," Dana explained, "people started coming forward with stories. Not just people defending you, people sharing how you'd helped them over the years. Stories I don't think you even know about." She opened the first notebook. "Do you remember Marcus Johnson, class of '92? I did remember Marcus. Quiet boy, struggled with reading, came from a difficult home situation. He's a police detective in Charlotte now," Dana continued. "He drove up here yesterday to tell me that you didn't just teach him English, you kept him fed his senior year. You figured out his family wasn't providing lunch money, so you started bringing extra sandwiches every day for 6 months. I felt tears prick my eyes. I'd forgotten about those sandwiches. Dana turned the page. Jennifer Walsh, class of '87. She says you caught her shoplifting at the drugstore when she was 16, but instead of turning her in, you made her work off the debt by helping you organize your classroom library. She owns 3 bookstores now. Story after story. Students I'd tutored, families I'd helped during hard times, community projects I'd supported. A scholarship fund I'd started in 1994, with money from Henry's insurance policy. Money I'd never told anyone came from me. Mabel, Susan Crawford said softly, that scholarship fund you established has helped 47 local kids go to college. 47. Some of them are doctors now, teachers, business owners, all because you believed in education and put your money where your values were. I was crying openly now. I never thought about it adding up like that. That's what makes it so powerful, Dana said. You weren't keeping score, you were just helping people because it was the right thing to do. She pulled out a folder. Mrs. Thornton, I've been documenting everything people have told me, and I want you to consider something. This story, your story, needs to be told. Not just the part about standing up to your family, but the part about what real community service looks like. I looked through the photographs people had brought. Pictures of graduation ceremonies where I'd been a teacher. Images of community events I'd helped organize. Newspaper clippings from the 1980s and 90s showing my work with literacy programs. There's a reporter from the Winston-Salem Journal who's heard about your situation, Dana continued. She specializes in human interest stories, particularly about elder rights and family dynamics. She wants to interview you. That evening, as I sat in my truly quiet house, Kenneth's family had moved out that afternoon. I thought about what Dana had shown me. All those lives I'd touched, all those people who remembered me not as a burden or an inconvenience, but as someone who had made their world a little better. My phone rang around 8 o'clock. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Thornton, this is David Chen. I was in your AP English class in 1995. I remembered David. Brilliant boy, wanted to be a writer. David, how are you, sweetheart? I'm good, Mrs. Thornton, really good. I'm a journalist now, work for the Washington Post. I heard about what's been happening with your family, and I wanted you to know that a lot of your former students are talking about it. We're all proud of you for standing up for yourself. He paused. But Mrs. Thornton, I also wanted to tell you something I should have said years ago. That essay assignment you gave us senior year, write about someone who changed your life. I wrote about my grandfather, but the truth is, I should have written about you. You're the one who taught me that words have power, that stories matter, that speaking truth is more important than keeping peace. After I hung up, I walked through my house, my real house now, not just the guest house, and I understood something I'd been too close to see before. I hadn't just taught English for 30 years. I'd taught people how to think, how to stand up for themselves, how to use their voices for good. Maybe it was time I started taking my own lessons. Wednesday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Eliza Wren's voice was tight with anger when she called me at 7 a.m. Mrs. Thornton, we have a serious problem. I need you in my office immediately. I drove to Asheville with my heart pounding, wondering what new betrayal awaited me. When I arrived at Eliza's office, she was pacing behind her desk like a caged tiger. Your son has filed a will contest, she said without preamble. He's claiming that your current will is invalid due to diminished capacity and undue influence. I sank into the chair across from her desk. What does that mean? It means he's trying to have you declared mentally incompetent so he can overturn any legal decisions you've made recently, including evicting him from the house. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own son was trying to have me declared insane. There's more, Eliza continued, her voice getting harder. He's filed papers claiming that a will exists from 2019 that leaves everything to him. He says you must have forgotten about it due to cognitive decline. But I never signed any will in 2019. The last will I signed was in 2015, and that one leaves everything to him anyway. contingent on his caring for me properly. Eliza smiled grimly. I know, because I have copies of every legal document you've ever signed with this firm. But Mrs. Thornton, your son has presented what appears to be a notarized will with your signature on it. She slid a document across the desk. I stared at it in shock. It did look like my signature, and it was dated March 15th, 2019. I never signed this. I know, because on March 15th, 2019, you were in my office updating your power of attorney documents. I have the security camera footage and the signed originals. But Mrs. Thornton, this is a very good forgery. I studied the document more carefully. The signature looked right. The wording sounded like something I might have written, but I had no memory of it whatsoever. Who notarized it? Someone named Robert Hayes, license number 847291. I checked with the State Notary Commission. That license belongs to a Robert Hayes who died in 2018. The room seemed to spin around me. Kenneth forged a will using a dead notary's seal. It appears so, which makes this document fraud, identity theft, and forgery. Your son is looking at serious prison time. I thought about Kenneth as a little boy, how proud I'd been when he graduated college, how I'd believed in him even when his business ventures failed. How had that sweet child become a man who would forge his mother's will? What do? We fight, and we win. Eliza opened another file. Because your son made several critical mistakes. She spread out documents like she was dealing cards. First, he claimed you signed this will in 2019, but the paper is wrong. This type of legal document paper wasn't available until 2021. I know because I special order it. Second, the typeface is Times New Roman 12 point. But every legal document you've ever signed with me has been in Times New Roman 11 point, because that's my firm's standard. Third and most damning, he included a clause leaving specific property to your grandson Cameron that you sold in 2020. I blinked. What property? The small rental cabin in Banner Elk. You sold it in January 2020 and put the money into your education fund. Kenneth couldn't have known about that sale because you never told him about it. But if you had actually written a will in 2019, you couldn't have left property you didn't own in 2021 when the document was actually created. My son wasn't just a forger, he was a sloppy forger. There's something else, Eliza continued. I've been investigating Kenneth's financial situation. Mrs. Thornton, your son is in much worse shape than you know. The business loan he used your house as collateral for. It's not his first, he owes money to 3 different banks, plus private investors. He's leveraged everything he owns, and some things he doesn't. She showed me a credit report that made me gasp. Kenneth owed over $340,000 to various creditors. His business was failing, his personal credit was destroyed, and he was facing bankruptcy within 6 months. He needs your property to stay solvent. Without it, he loses everything. And he thought forging a will was easier than asking his mother for help. Mrs. Thornton, asking for help would have meant admitting his failures. Forging a will meant he could take what he needed and blame it on your mental decline. Much easier on the ego. I stared at the false will, at my son's desperate attempt to steal my life's work. What happens now? Now we take this to the district attorney. Forgery, fraud, elder abuse. Kenneth is looking at 5 to 10 years in prison. But first we destroy his legal challenge. The hearing was set for Friday afternoon at the Watauga County Courthouse. Eliza had prepared meticulously. She brought the security camera footage from March 15, 2019, showing me in her office at the exact time I was supposedly signing the forged will. She brought the notary commission records showing Robert Hayes died 8 months before the alleged will was signed. She brought paper samples and typeface analysis. But what she didn't bring, what she couldn't have known about, was the witness I brought with me. Margaret Stevens had been Henry's secretary at the publishing company for 15 years. She was also one of the most detail-oriented people I'd ever known. Your Honor, Margaret testified. I've seen Mrs. Thornton's signature thousands of times over the years. She has a very distinctive way of writing her mail. She makes a little loop on the second hump that most people miss. The signature on this will doesn't have that loop. The judge examined the documents with a magnifying glass. After 10 minutes of silence, he looked up. Mr. Thornton, this document is clearly fraudulent. The charges against your mother's mental capacity are dismissed. Furthermore, I'm ordering this matter turned over to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Kenneth went white. Jill started crying. Their lawyer started shuffling papers, like he could disappear into them. But I felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years. I felt protected by the law instead of threatened by it. Outside the courthouse, Kenneth tried one last desperate plea. Mum, please. I can explain everything. I was just trying to secure our family's future. I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he become someone I didn't recognize? Kenneth, I said quietly, you forged my will. You tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. You abandoned me on a mountain road. At what point did I stop being your mother and become just an obstacle to your inheritance? He had no answer for that. The district attorney will be in touch, I told him. I suggest you find a good criminal lawyer. As I walked away, I heard Jill begging Kenneth to do something, anything, to fix this. But some things can't be fixed. They can only be survived. The day I decided to rewrite my will was the day I finally understood the difference between justice and revenge. Justice is about making things right. Revenge is about making things hurt. What I was about to do was pure justice, seasoned with just enough consequence to make the lesson stick. It was a crisp October morning when I walked into Eliza Wren's office with my decision made. She looked up from her desk where she was preparing Kenneth's criminal case files. Mrs. Thornton, you look like a woman with a plan. I am. I want to change my will, completely. She leaned back in her chair. Tell me what you're thinking. I pulled out a handwritten list I'd been working on for 3 days. Kenneth, Jill, Cameron, and Bree get nothing. Not 1 penny, not 1 stick of furniture, not 1 inch of land. That's certainly your right. What about the rest of your estate? That's where my plan got interesting. I want to establish 3 scholarship funds, 1 for students from single-parent homes, 1 for older women returning to education, and 1 for young people interested in teaching. I want to donate the house and property to the North Carolina Writers Retreat Foundation, with the stipulation that it provides residencies for women over 60 who want to write their stories. Eliza was taking notes, but she looked up with approval. What about your personal assets? I want to create a trust fund for Dana Bell. She's the kind of public servant who should be rewarded for caring about people others overlook. And I want to leave money to establish the Henry Thornton Community Education Center at the library. Mrs. Thornton, that's a significant legacy gift. Your family won't be able to contest it easily, but they'll certainly try. I smiled. Let them try. But Eliza, I want to add 1 special provision. She raised an eyebrow. I want to offer Kenneth 1 final inheritance option. He can receive $1, exactly $1, if he writes and publishes a public apology in the Mountain Times newspaper. A full detailed apology for the fraud, the abandonment and the years of emotional abuse. If he admits what he did and asks for forgiveness from the community he deceived, he gets $1, and if he refuses, then he gets exactly what he gave me for the last 15 years, nothing. We spent 4 hours crafting the new will. Every clause was bulletproof, every decision documented with clear reasoning. When we finished, I had created a legacy that would help hundreds of people while ensuring my family learned the true cost of taking someone for granted. When do you want this to take effect? Immediately, but Eliza, I want to tell them myself. All of them together, one last time. She scheduled a meeting for the following Friday at her office. I personally called Kenneth, Jill, Cameron, and Bree. I told them we needed to discuss the family's legal situation and their inheritance. They all agreed to come, probably expecting me to restore their place in my will, now that the fraud charges were pending. They were in for a surprise. Friday afternoon, my family filed into Eliza's conference room, looking like defendants at a trial, which in a way they were. Thank you all for coming, I began, standing at the head of the table, like I used to do in faculty meetings. I wanted to explain the changes I've made to my will. Kenneth leaned forward eagerly. Mum, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. We can put all this legal nonsense behind us and go back to being a family. Oh, we're definitely putting the legal issues behind us, I said. Kenneth, your criminal trial is set for January. The district attorney feels very confident about the fraud and elder abuse charges, but that's separate from what we're discussing today. I nodded to Eliza, who began reading from the new will. To my son Kenneth Thornton, I leave the sum of $1, conditional upon his publication of a written apology in the Mountain Times newspaper, acknowledging his fraudulent actions and requesting forgiveness from the community. Kenneth's face went through several color changes. $1, Mum, you can't be serious. To my daughter-in-law Jill Thornton, I leave nothing, as she has contributed nothing to my well-being in the 15 years she has lived in my house. Jill gasped. This is insane. You can't cut out your own family. To my grandson Cameron Thornton, I leave nothing, as he has shown no interest in maintaining a relationship with me beyond what might benefit him financially. Cameron, who had been playing with his phone, finally looked up. Grandma, this is really messed up. To my granddaughter Bree Thornton, I leave nothing, as she has demonstrated that she values only what I can provide materially, not who I am as a person. Bree started crying. But Grandma, we love you. Do you? I asked. Bree, honey, when's my birthday? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Cameron, what was my job before I retired? He shrugged. I don't know. Something with books. Kenneth, where did I meet your father? My own son stared at me blankly. Jill, what's my favorite flower? Silence. You see, I continued, you all love my money. You love my property. You love what I can do for you. But none of you love me enough to know even the most basic facts about my life. Eliza continued reading the will, explaining how my estate would instead benefit the community, support education, and help women find their voices. With each clause, my family's faces grew more desperate. The total estate value, Eliza concluded, including property, investments and business interests, is approximately $4.7 million, none of which will pass to blood relatives. Kenneth exploded. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent. Mum, you're not thinking clearly. This is why I had to take action. You mean why you had to forge my will? He stopped mid-sentence. Kenneth, you didn't try to prevent anything. You tried to steal everything. There's a difference. Jill tried begging. Mabel, please, think about what you're doing. We made mistakes, but we can change. We can be better. I'm sure you can. I agreed, and I hope you will, but you'll be learning those lessons without my money as incentive. As they filed out of Eliza's office, each of them tried one last appeal. Bree promised to visit more often. Cameron offered to help with yard work. Jill suggested family counseling. Kenneth just stared at me with something that might have been hatred. You'll regret this, Mum. I looked at my son, this stranger, who had forged my signature, and abandoned me on a mountain road, and I felt nothing but pity. Kenneth, the only thing I regret is waiting so long to do it. That evening, I sat in my house, my truly empty, truly quiet house, and read the Mountain Times. Tomorrow they would publish the first article about the scholarship funds I was establishing. Next week, they would run the story about the writer's retreat. And if Kenneth wanted his $1 inheritance, they would eventually publish his apology too. Somehow I doubted they would be getting that particular story. 6 months after I changed my will, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The quiet house that had once felt empty, now felt peaceful. The mornings that used to drag with loneliness, now flew by with purpose. I was teaching again. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m., 12 women between the ages of 55 and 78 gathered in the community room at the Boone Public Library for what we called Finding Your Voice, a writing workshop for women who have stories to tell. It started as Dana Bell's idea. She'd been encouraging me to write down my own story, and when I mentioned how many women my age had lived through extraordinary times but never felt qualified to put their experiences on paper, she suggested I teach them. Mrs. Thornton, she'd said, you spent 30 years teaching teenagers how to write. Imagine what you could do with adults who actually want to be there. She was right. These women, retired teachers, former nurses, empty nesters, widows finding themselves for the first time in decades, they came to class hungry for something they'd never been allowed to want, the chance to matter on their own terms. There was Martha, who'd raised 6 children and wanted to write about what it was like to be a mother during the Vietnam War. There was Patricia, who'd been one of the first female engineers at the Tennessee Valley Authority and had stories about breaking barriers that needed telling. And there was Carol, whose husband had died the year before, leaving her free to write the poetry she'd been composing in her head for 40 years. Ladies, I told them during our first session, you've spent most of your lives making other people's stories possible. Your children's stories, your husband's stories, your employer's stories. Today we start making your stories possible. The transformation was remarkable. Women who had introduced themselves as just a housewife, or nobody important, began discovering they had lived through history, had wisdom worth sharing, but the real surprise came when Dana approached me, after our third month of classes. Mrs. Thornton, I've been talking to a friend of mine at the Winston-Salem Journal. She's heard about your writing group, and she's interested in your story too. Not just what happened with your family, but the whole picture, the teaching, the publishing business, the scholarships, the way you've rebuilt your life. I was hesitant at first. I'd never been someone who sought attention, but Dana pressed on. This isn't about attention, it's about inspiration. Do you know how many older women are stuck in situations like you were? How many of them think they don't have any power, any choices, any worth beyond what they can do for ungrateful family members? She was right, of course. In just 6 months of teaching, I'd met dozens of women with similar stories. Adult children who took advantage of their generosity, families who treated them as convenient caretakers rather than individuals with their own dreams and needs. The interview with Sarah Mitchell from the Journal took place on a Thursday afternoon in February. Sarah was a woman about 50, with kind eyes and the kind of careful attention that made me trust her immediately. Mrs. Thornton, she began, I understand you've had quite a year, so I told her everything. The forgotten birthdays, the gradual isolation, the incident on Grandfather Mountain, the forged will, and finally the decision to reclaim my life and use my resources to help others. What I find most remarkable, Sarah said as our interview concluded, is that you didn't just escape your situation, you transformed it into something that's helping hundreds of people. She was right. The scholarship funds were already supporting 12 local students. The writers' retreat was scheduled to open that fall, with applications from women all over the Southeast. The Community Education Center was offering free literacy classes and computer training. I spent so many years thinking my worth was measured by how much I could give to people who didn't appreciate it, I told her. Now I'm giving to people who do appreciate it, and the difference is extraordinary. The article ran on a Sunday in March, with a headline that made me laugh. At 82, she wrote herself a new ending. It included a photo of me with my writing class, all 13 of us, looking proud and determined. Within a week, I started getting calls. Other newspapers wanted interviews. A documentary filmmaker from Asheville was interested in my story. Most surprisingly, a literary agent from New York called about the memoir I'd started writing in my own workshop. Mrs. Thornton, stories like yours need to be told. There are millions of women who need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, never too late to start over, never too late to matter. But the call that meant the most came from a woman named Helen in Tennessee. Mrs. Thornton, I'm 76 years old, and I've been living with my son's family for 8 years since my husband died. They treat me exactly like your family treated you. I read your story in the paper, and I want you to know, you gave me courage. I'm meeting with a lawyer next week. That's when I understood the real power of what had happened to me. It wasn't just about justice for one forgotten grandmother in North Carolina. It was about showing other women that age doesn't mean powerlessness, that kindness doesn't require martyrdom, that we all deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of how much money we have or how useful we are to others. By spring, I was getting letters from women all over the country. Some were sharing their own stories of family betrayal and recovery. Others were asking for advice about standing up to adult children who had forgotten their manners. A few were starting their own writing groups, using the curriculum I'd developed for my library classes. One letter particularly touched me. It was from a woman in Oregon whose daughter-in-law had been stealing money from her checking account. I read your story, she wrote, and I realized I have choices, I have power, I have worth beyond what I can provide to people who don't appreciate me. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to love my family without letting them destroy me. That's when I knew that everything I'd been through, the years of neglect, the heartbreak of betrayal, the difficulty of starting over at 82, had been worth it. Not because it had made me stronger, though it had, not because it had made me richer, though it had done that too, but because it had made me useful in a way I'd never been before. I was helping women find their voices, claim their power, and write their own endings. And at 82, I was just getting started. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in May, delivered by hand from the North Carolina Council on Women's Leadership. Heavy cream paper, elegant script. The kind of invitation that announces something important. Mabel Thornton is hereby nominated for the 2024 Outstanding Community Impact Award, recognizing her exceptional contributions to education, women's empowerment, and elder advocacy. I sat in my kitchen, holding that invitation and thinking about how much my life had changed. A year ago, I was invisible in my own home. Now I was being recognized across the state for work I'd done, simply because it needed doing. Dana Bell called me that afternoon, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mrs. Thornton, do you understand what this means? The Community Impact Award goes to one person per year. Last year's winner was a woman who started a network of homeless shelters. The year before, it was someone who revolutionized rural healthcare. Dana, honey, I just teach writing classes and give away money I don't need. You've established scholarship programs that will help students for generations. You're opening a writer's retreat that's already booked solid for 2 years. You've inspired dozens of women to change their lives, and your story has been shared in newspapers from here to California. That's not just anything." The award ceremony was scheduled for June 15th at the Biltmore Estate in Asheville. I would be one of 5 honorees, the only one over 80, and according to Dana, the one generating the most media interest. "There's going to be a documentary crew there," she warned me, "and representatives from 3 publishing houses who want to talk to you about your memoir, my memoir." The book I'd started as a writing exercise had grown into something bigger than I'd ever intended. What began as my own story had become a guide for other women facing similar situations, a handbook for reclaiming power, rebuilding identity, and refusing to disappear just because society expects older women to fade away quietly. "I have a surprise for you," Dana said, as we planned for the ceremony. "Remember how you've been wondering whether your story really matters, whether you're making a real difference?" She handed me a thick folder. "These are letters from women who've read your newspaper interviews or heard you speak. I've been collecting them for months." I opened the folder to find dozens of handwritten letters, emails printed on home computers, even a few typed on actual typewriters. Stories from women ranging in age from 55 to 91, all of whom had made changes in their lives after learning about mine. There was Margaret from Florida, who'd been living with her son's family and discovered they'd been stealing her Social Security checks. After reading my story, she'd found her own apartment and was taking art classes for the first time in her life. There was Linda from Texas, whose daughter had been manipulating her into free babysitting 7 days a week. She'd learned to say no and was now volunteering at a literacy center instead. There was Ruth from Virginia, 87 years old, who'd divorced her emotionally abusive husband of 60 years and was living independently for the first time in her adult life. "Mrs. Thornton," Ruth had written, "I thought it was too late for me to have a life of my own. You showed me that 87 is just another number. I start college this fall. I'm majoring in psychology because I want to help other women who think they don't have choices." By the time I finished reading, I was crying. Not sad tears, but tears of overwhelming gratitude. Somehow my private family drama had become a catalyst for women across the country to reclaim their lives. The award ceremony was more elaborate than anything I'd ever attended. The Biltmore's ballroom was filled with North Carolina's most influential women, politicians, business leaders, non-profit founders. I felt out of place until I saw the faces in the audience. Dozens of women from my writing workshop, former students who'd driven from all over the state, and community members who'd known me for decades. When they called my name, I walked to the podium in my best navy dress, the same one I'd worn the day I reclaimed my house, and looked out at an audience of nearly 300 people. "Ladies," I began, "a year ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing here, I would have suggested they check their medication, but here I am, and here you are, and I think there's an important lesson in that." I talked about invisibility, about how society trains women to believe their value decreases with age. I talked about the difference between being kind and being taken advantage of. I talked about the power we all have to write new endings to old stories. The greatest tragedy isn't that my family treated me poorly, I concluded. The tragedy would have been if I had accepted that treatment as what I deserved. Every woman in this room has the right to dignity, respect, and purpose, regardless of her age, regardless of her circumstances, regardless of what her family thinks she's worth. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. After the ceremony, as I mingled with guests and accepted congratulations, I saw a familiar figure standing near the back of the room. Kenneth. He looked older, thinner, worn down by the legal proceedings that had resulted in 2 years probation and community service. He approached hesitantly, and I could see the other guests watching our interaction with curiosity. "Mom," he said quietly, "I wanted to congratulate you. This is really something." "Thank you, Kenneth." We stood there for a moment, former mother and son, now little more than strangers. "I know it's too late," he said, "but I want you to know that I understand what I did was wrong. All of it." I looked at this man who had once been my precious boy, who had grown into someone I didn't recognize, who was now trying to find his way back to decency. "Kenneth, it's never too late to become a better person, but it's too late for us to go back to what we were." He nodded, and I saw tears in his eyes. As he walked away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not happiness about his pain, not satisfaction with his consequences, but simple peace with the boundaries I'd drawn. Later that evening, back in my quiet house in the Blue Ridge Mountains, I sat down to work on the final chapter of my memoir, the book that would be published next spring, the book that was already generating speaking requests from women's organizations across the country. I titled the last chapter, Beginning Again at 83, because that's exactly what I was doing. I was beginning again, with the wisdom of 8 decades, the resources to make a difference, and the understanding that it's never too late to matter. Outside my window, I could see the lights of the writer's retreat, where 12 women were spending the week working on their own stories, their own new beginnings. Tomorrow I would teach my writing workshop. Next month, I would speak at a conference on elder rights. Next year, I would publish a book that might help other women find the courage to change their lives. At 83, I wasn't ending my story, I was just getting to the good part.